Whether you are new to MLB The Show 23 or simply just trying to get the competitive edge on your opponent, these are the tips for you. Today, we're going to be talking about tips to get better hitting in MLB The Show 23. There's a couple tips that are really important that everyone should be able to do. Let's start with tip number 1, your equipment. So ultimately, your equipment is one of the most important factors into how you're able to hit. Keep in mind, your equipment really determines how well you are able to react to the pitch and how well you're able to get the ball onto the PCI with your precision. The first thing I would recommend is a monitor that is at least 1080p and can output 120 hertz of your game. Now that is specifically for next gen consoles because the previous generation of consoles are unable to output 120 hertz. However, on the next gen console, that is an option, and ultimately that is the better move for you. You're able to see the ball better, you'll have better timing, and the movement of the pitch will look a lot more consistent. Second off is your controller. For me, I use the Power A Fusion Pro 2. I am on the Xbox Series X. Now, if you are on PlayStation, there is the DualSense Edge controller. That ultimately is going to be your best controller option from what I've heard from other people in the community. Another thing that I use are called control freaks. They're basically rubber grips that you add onto your controller that give you a little bit more precision and a little bit more feel to where you're moving your PCI to each pitch. Another thing to note specifically about the monitor is to make sure it has a 1 millisecond response time. Now, some TVs have this on the higher range, but most TVs will not. This ultimately is going to be your biggest factor among any screen that you'll ever have because this response time is the actual delay from your input to the game. So the greater the delay, the more off you'll be when it comes to taking pitches. So next up, we are going to be talking about the settings. This is another major thing that you have to change to get better at MLB The Show. Now, ultimately, some of these settings are completely up to you, and that there are certain things that you could do later on, but we'll get to those later. The biggest thing ultimately is that the type of hitting that you want to do, your hitting interface is zone. That will create what is called the PCI on your screen. And when we get into the hitting later, I'll show you what the PCI is, what it looks like, and what it's supposed to represent. Ultimately, this is the best hitting because it allows you to have full control of your swing and where it is your guy will be swinging. The PCI anchor is one of those things where we'll talk about that later, but ultimately that is something that if it works for you, it works for you. If it does not, it does not. Moving on, as you can see, we have the option for the plate coverage indicator, also known as the PCI. Make sure that is set to on, and then everything else is up to you. Use what you think you are comfortable with. Use what you think would work. For me, I use PCI Center Bat. Ultimately, I think that is the best PCI center that you could use because it literally uses a baseball bat as your PCI. But when it comes to your PCI inner and your PCI outer, the PCI inner size is determined by your contact or clutch with people on base and the pitcher's hits per 9. It's a combination of the two. Variables go into each other, and that ultimately determines the size of the PCI inner. The PCI outer is ultimately determined by your player's vision and the pitcher's K per 9 rating. Again, with PCI color, transparency, and fade out, this is up to you. You can play around with this if you'd like, but for me, default is more than enough to not have to change anything. The second most important thing is the hitting view. A lot of people think that a more zoomed out hitting view is a good thing, where ultimately it's the exact opposite. You want to be as zoomed in as you possibly can, and from what I've found, strike zone hitting or strike zone high hitting is the best option for your hitting view. Again, this can be something you could play with a little bit, but ultimately I would recommend only using strike zone or strike zone high. So once you get the proper equipment, once you start to get your settings down, now is the time to actually worry about how you are hitting at the plate. The first thing you're going to want to look at is your patience. Your patience and your discipline is going to be one of the biggest things when it comes to hitting, and ultimately, if you're not patient for good strikes, you won't become a better hitter. Now, this also has to do with your approach. Now, your approach is what you should be looking for every single pitch. The way I do it, I always time up best fastball. The reason for that, if I have a guy who throws really fast on the mound and I'm timing up a slider or a changeup, if he does throw me that fastball, I'm most likely going to be extremely late on it and ultimately may not be able to get the best contact. But if I time up the best fastball and he throws me a slider, I'm able to wait on the pitch rather than catch up to it and not feel rushed. Almost always, it is easier to slow yourself down and wait for a breaking ball than it is to speed yourself up while you're trying to find a fastball. The developers of the game have also come out recently and said that the timing is the most important thing with your swing. So if you're going to get one thing down among all things, whether it being PCI placement or timing, get your timing down first, because that's going to be one of those things where even if you miss the PCI a little bit, having good timing may cause you to hit the ball a little bit harder than normal. And let's be real, even if you do square a ball up perfectly, if you're very late or very early, you're either not going to hit the ball at all or it's going to be weak contact. Now, once you're able to have the proper approach and you're able to start taking pitches, the next thing to worry about is where are you looking when the pitcher is throwing the ball? Where are you going to start tracking the pitch out of his hand? Because ultimately, you have to see the ball out of the hand to not be late on it. So the way I look at it is I look at about the logo on his jersey as he's winding up and getting ready to deliver the ball. And then as he gets to this point where he's about to release the baseball, I pick the ball up from his hand. Now, from his hand, you're able to see the exact movement out of the hand, and this is where a good monitor comes in. You're actually able to see a slight movement coming out of his hand to determine what kind of pitch it's going to be. That's going to be coming in a later video. I need to break it down a little bit more, but usually there is always a sweeping motion or a little bit of almost like a glitch in the ball that allows you to know what pitch is going to come out of his hand. Now, in this case, like I said, pick the ball up out of his hand and be ready to receive the best fastball that he has or the fastest pitch that he has, whether it's a sinker, cutter, whatever. But ultimately in this scenario, if you're able to see the ball out of the hand and you're timing up best fastball, that is the best possible scenario that you can set yourself up for. And if you do see it's a breaking ball later on, you are able to adjust for that. So moving on, the next biggest thing is going to be precision with your PCI. You don't want to make super quick movements like this, because like you see, if you make a super quick movement, that movement ultimately makes you have a worse PCI because you're slamming it. You want to be able to use the slight movements, and you can practice this in custom practice. You can make slight movements, and then if you see it's going to the bottom of the zone, the top of the zone, or wherever, you can move from there. So for me, I usually start a little bit lower than the middle of the zone. The way I start, most of the online pitches that you see will be low in the zone, so I tend to start about here without using a PCI anchor. And then if, let's say, the ball is down the middle, I'm able to just let go of the stick, and my PCI is right down the middle. Now, for example, Zach Wheeler's about to throw another pitch here. I'm going to start about where I normally do, and I'm going to read the pitch out of his hand. I'm going to not make any quick movements. As you can see, the movement was, it was a little bit quick, but it's one of those things where as you practice with it with time, the movements that you're able to make are going to be a bit more precise and ultimately will give you better results. Now, as you're doing that, as you can see in an 0-2 count, the approach is there. He's thrown me two sinkers right here. Most likely he's going to be throwing me some sort of off speed. Now, if it was me in this situation, I would throw an outside slider. The CPU in the game's a little weird. They're most likely going to throw me an off-speed pitch. Let's see what they do. So as you can see, it was an outside slider, like I would do. I was able to read that. I was able to sit on it. It was an outside pitch, and I was able to just drive it the other way for a single. Now, if you were sitting a changeup there, and he ended up throwing a fastball, you would ultimately be too late on it, and you'd probably strike out. The next biggest thing ultimately is just practicing. The only way you will ever get better at MLB The Show in terms of hitting is practicing and receiving as many reps as you possibly can. Now, if you expect to only be playing on All-Star for your entire time, that's okay. But there's a way you can practice that in the game. It's called custom practices in the main menus. You can choose a team that you like, a player that you'd like, whether it be current or legend, and you can take as many swings as you possibly want. I am currently in it right now, and as you can see, I can take as many pitches as I'd like. No fielders. You can have a team practice as well with fielders if you want to do that in an actual count. But you could just take as many pitches as you'd like, and you could just swing away. Now, this is a great way to warm up early in the day, especially later in the year if you start getting up into higher difficulties for ranked seasons. This is something that is a really good way to kind of break yourself into a new difficulty, especially once you start getting into Hall of Fame or Legend difficulty. Those difficulties are really hard to get to and really hard to excel on, and taking as many swings as you possibly can before hopping into a ranked game absolutely will improve your gameplay overall. But in here too, especially in the team practice, you can practice your approaches, you can practice different swing types with different players, you can practice receiving different pitches. As you can see in the menus here, you can tell the pitcher exactly what pitch to throw, where to throw it. Like let's say you struggle with inside pitches on fastballs, you could specifically tell the pitcher, hey, throw me fastballs inside only, and you could work on that. But ultimately, this is a really good place to work on your eye as well, because you could tell them, hey, throw me pitches on the outside, inside, wherever parts of the zone, or even out of the zone, and it'll allow you to basically track the movements of those pitches and let you learn about the game. But like I said, ultimately, this is going to be the best option for you to learn. You can play offline games as well, or online games, just to learn the game more and more and try to learn people's patterns and how particular pitches move and how pitch speeds and different things work for you. Ultimately, though, that is going to be the best thing I can do for you in terms of tips. The biggest things are mostly your equipment, patience, timing, as well as just being precise with your movements, and of course, just the practice and the muscle memory from everything. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video today. I'm trying to do everything I can to make y'all the better player, and I hit World Series every season last season, went flawless multiple times, and with these tips, you absolutely will be able to as well. Please be sure to leave a like on this video and leave a comment in the section on what you do that I may not have said that may work for you and possibly others. Please be sure to sub to the channel. We have all things MLB The Show 23 coming your way. I appreciate you guys for watching this video. Have a great one, and I'll catch you in the next one.